They laughed at his homemade Christmas ornaments until the dragon princess wore one. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The orbital trading station Meridian hung in the void between stars, a neutral ground, where 100 different species bartered, negotiated, and occasionally tried not to kill each other. In the lower maintenance quarters, where the air recyclers hummed a bit too loud and the walls showed decades of patched repairs, a human janitor named Ethan Cole was doing something that would change the course of interstellar diplomacy forever. He was making Christmas ornaments out of recycled parts. Ethan had been working on Meridian Station for 3 years now, ever since his colony ship funding fell through and left him stranded. The pay was terrible, the hours were long, and most species on the station treated maintenance workers like furniture. But Ethan had learned long ago that happiness was something you created for yourself, not something you waited for the universe to hand you. And with Earth's winter holidays approaching, according to his personal calendar, he was determined to bring a little Christmas cheer to his tiny quarters, even if he was the only human within 50 light years. He sat at his workbench, which was really just a folding table he had salvaged from a cargo bay, surrounded by bits and pieces he had collected over the months. Broken circuit boards with their colorful patterns, scraps of reflective hull plating that caught the light, discarded power cells that still glowed faintly, fragments of crystal from a shattered Valoran meditation sphere, wire solder, adhesive, and an absolutely unreasonable amount of patience. His fingers worked, carefully twisting thin copper wire into delicate spirals. He had learned to work with precision during his brief time at engineering school before the financial realities of being an orphan had redirected his life path toward more immediate employment. Now those skills found new purpose as he shaped a tiny star from whole fragments, each point catching the light differently, creating a subtle rainbow effect. The door to his quarters hissed open without warning. Ethan looked up to find 3 of his coworkers standing in the doorway. There was Vex, a Creelian whose species looked like bipedal lizards with too many teeth. Beside him stood Quellen, an insectoid whose translation implant gave her voice an artificial cheerfulness that never quite matched her actual mood. And leaning against the door frame was Marek, a hulking Grinchar who worked security and seemed to enjoy making Ethan's life difficult. Vex's eyes, which could rotate independently, both focused on Ethan's workbench. The curve's mouth split into what Ethan had learned to recognize as amusement, though it looked more like a predator sizing up prey. Vex said with a hissing laugh, "What exactly are you doing?" "Human." Ethan held up the star he had been working on. The light from his desk lamp made it sparkle, tiny rainbows dancing across his walls. He said, "Making Christmas ornaments, it's a human tradition. We decorate trees, exchange gifts, spend time with family. Since I don't have a tree or family here, I figured I'd at least make the ornaments, something to brighten up the place." Quellen's antennae twitched, which Ethan had learned indicated confusion or disbelief. Her voice came out in that unsettling, cheerful tone. She said, "You are crafting decorative objects from refuse. This is a human holiday custom to celebrate with garbage." Ethan felt his face flushed slightly, but he kept his voice even. He said it's not garbage, these are materials that still have beauty and purpose, and yes, making things by hand is part of the tradition. It's about creativity, effort, and making something meaningful out of whatever you have available. Mordec's deep rumble of a voice filled the small room. Grinchar said, "This is the most pathetic thing I have ever witnessed. And I once saw a Pelian try to mate with a potted plant. You sit here alone, playing with trash, pretending it has value. This is why humans are confined to maintenance work, no vision, no understanding of true worth." The three of them laughed, the sound mixing unpleasantly in the small space. Vex picked up one of the completed ornaments, a delicate sphere Ethan had made from layered transparent plastics. Each layer tinted a different color, so it seemed to glow from within. Vex said mockingly, "And what exactly would one do with such a thing? Does it serve a function? Does it increase efficiency? Does it generate revenue?" Ethan took a slow breath, fighting down the familiar ache of being underestimated, of being dismissed. He said quietly, "It makes people happy, that's the function. Beauty for its own sake, joy for its own sake. Not everything has to be quantified or monetized." Quellen's laughter sounded like breaking glass. She said, "How wonderfully primitive. The human believes aesthetics without utility have value. No wonder your species is confined to the lower levels of galactic society. You waste time on meaningless frivolity while others advance." Mordek plucked the glowing sphere from Vex's claws and tossed it carelessly from hand to hand. Each catch made Ethan cease, knowing how fragile his creation was, how many hours he had spent getting the layers just right. The Grinchar said, "Tell me, human, when the station's recyclers fail or the waste systems back up, does your festive garbage help repair them? Does your joy solve actual problems?" Ethan stood up slowly, his jaw tight. He was tired, he was lonely, and he was sick of being treated like his interests and traditions were worthless just because they were different. He said with controlled anger, "Get out of my quarters. You've had your laugh. You've made your point. Now leave." Vex set down the ornament he was holding, but not gently. It clinked against the metal table hard enough to crack one of the delicate layers. The Kalian said, "Sensitive little human, we merely came to observe the curiosity of your waste of time, but very well. Enjoy your trash crafts. Try not to cut yourself on your own failure." They left, their laughter echoing down the corridor. Ethan stood alone in his quarters, looking at his workbench covered in half-finished ornaments, at the cracked sphere that had taken him 2 days to perfect, at the evidence of his attempt to hold on to something that mattered to him. For a moment he considered sweeping it all into the recycler. What was the point? Who was he making these for? There would be no tree, no family gathering, no Christmas morning wonder, just him alone on a station full of species who thought human traditions were primitive and pointless. But then he looked at the tiny star in his hand, at the way the light caught each point, at the care and precision he had put into every twist of wire, and he remembered why he had started this project in the first place. Not for them, for himself, because beauty mattered, because traditions mattered, because refusing to let the universe grind away everything that made you human was its own form of rebellion. Ethan sat back down at his workbench and picked up his tools. He had dozens more ornaments to make, and only 2 weeks until Christmas by Earth's calendar. If he was going to celebrate properly, he had work to do over the following days. Word spread through the lower levels of the station about the human janitor and his trash decorations. It became a running joke among the maintenance crews. Workers would pass Ethan in the corridors and make comments about his craft projects. Someone left a bag of actual garbage outside his door with a note suggesting he had run out of materials. During his shifts, he would sometimes catch groups watching him and laughing, clearly talking about him. Ethan endured it with as much dignity as he could manage. He did his job, kept his head down, and spent his off hours at his workbench. The collection of ornaments grew slowly but steadily. He made snowflakes from wire and reflective strips. He created tiny bells from shaped metal that actually chimed when moved. He fashioned stars and spheres and spirals, each one unique, each one carrying hours of focused attention and care. He had just finished a particularly complex piece, a miniature cathedral window made from fragments of colored transparent materials fitted together like a mosaic. When his comm unit chirped, the message was tour and official. Report to administrative level 7, conference room Sigma. Immediately, Ethan's stomach dropped. Administrative level 7 was where the station's leadership worked. Maintenance personnel were never summoned there unless something had gone seriously wrong. Had he broken some regulation with his ornament making? Was he being fired? Deported? He cleaned up quickly, changed into his least stained work coverall, and made his way to the upper levels. The transition was jarring. Down in maintenance, everything was functional and worn. Up here, the corridors gleamed. The air smelled filtered and fresh. The other beings he passed wore expensive clothes and walked with the confidence of people who made important decisions. Conference room Sigma was behind a door of polished Valoran crystal that probably cost more than Ethan would earn in a decade. He pressed the entry request button and waited, his heart hammering. A voice said, "Enter." The room beyond was stunning. A massive window showed the starfield beyond the station, a view so clear it felt like standing in open space. The table was real wood imported from Earth at staggering expense, and seated around it were some of the most powerful beings on Meridian Station. Station administrator Kelvin, a human woman in her 60s whose steel gray hair and sharp eyes had earned her the respect of a 100 species. Trade Director Vaughn, a massive Theron whose species valued commerce above all else. Security Chief Rannick, whose military bearing was evident even sitting down, and at the head of the table, in a seat that seemed to shimmer with contained energy, sat someone who made Ethan forget to breathe. She was Draconian, one of the proud and ancient species that controlled 3 sectors of space and treated most other races with barely concealed contempt. Her scales shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, catching the starlight. Her eyes were golden with vertical slit pupils, measuring Ethan with an intensity that made him feel like a mouse before a cat. Her horns, elegant and swept back, were adorned with precious metals and stones that represented centuries of her family's achievements. She wore robes that probably cost more than the entire lower maintenance level, and she radiated power and aristocratic disdain. In equal measure, Administrator Kelvin gestured to a chair. She said, "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming on short Notice, please sit. We have a rather unusual situation that requires your expertise. Ethan sat completely baffled. His expertise, he was a janitor with decent soldering skills and a hobby. Kelvin continued, allow me to introduce Crown Princess Seraphine of the Draconian Imperial House of Flames. Eternal, she has been conducting trade negotiations on behalf of her government. For the past month, those negotiations have now concluded successfully. The princess inclined her head slightly, an acknowledgement that managed to be both gracious and condescending. Princess Seraphine's voice was cultured, musical, and cold. She said, the administrator speaks accurately. My time on this station has been productive. However, before my departure, there is a matter of cultural protocol that must be observed. Ethan had absolutely no idea why he was in this room. He looked between the faces at the table, searching for a clue. Born the trade director leaned forward. His species communicated partly through color changes in their skin, and right now he was displaying patterns that suggested both excitement and anxiety. Vaughn said, Princess Seraphine, successful negotiations represent the largest trade agreement in the station's history. The economic implications for the entire sector are substantial. As per Draconian custom, such achievements must be marked by a ceremonial exchange of gifts. Calvin picked up the explanation. She said, the princess has already selected gifts for the primary negotiators. However, Draconian protocol requires that she also present a gift to one individual who represents the common workers of the station, someone who embodies the daily labor that makes places like Meridian function. As the senior human administrator, I was consulted on an appropriate choice. I selected you. Ethan felt like he had been dropped into someone else's meeting. This made no sense. There were thousands of workers on the station, many with far more seniority and skill than him. He said carefully, I'm honored administrator, but I don't understand WMY specifically. Princess Seraphine spoke, and her tone suggested this entire proceeding was tedious. She said, Draconian tradition requires that the worker selected must be someone whose labor is honest but unheralded, who maintains the infrastructure others take for granted. You are apparently suitable by these measures. The ceremony is a formality, but one my culture takes seriously. You will accept the gift. You will express gratitude, and this obligation will be fulfilled. Randick, the security chief, added, the princess departs tomorrow. The ceremony is scheduled for this evening in the Grand Hall. You'll be provided with appropriate attire. Your presence is required. Ethan's mind raced. This was surreal. He was going to receive a gift from Dragon royalty in front of station dignitaries because he cleaned floors and fixed broken equipment really well. He said, of course I'll be there. Thank you for the honor. Kelvin smiled slightly, the first warm expression in the room. She said, good. Report to the Diplomatic Services office at 1800 hours. They'll get you prepared. And Ethan, this matters more than you might think. The Draconians don't extend these gestures lightly. It reflects well on all of humanity that one of us is being recognized. Ethan left the conference room in a daze. He had 6 hours to process the fact that he was going to be part of a formal Draconian ceremony. 6 hours to figure out how not to embarrass himself, his species, and the entire Station in front of alien royalty, he made it back to his quarters and sat down heavily on his bunk, staring at his workbench. The ornaments he had been making seemed even more trivial now. Here he was playing with crafts like a child, while the real world of diplomacy and power moved around him. But as he sat there, an idea began to form. Crazy, probably stupid idea, but one that wouldn't leave him alone. Draconian tradition required an exchange of gifts. The princess was giving him something. Shouldn't he give something in return? Wouldn't showing up empty-handed be insulting, even if no one expected a lowly maintenance worker to have anything worth giving? Ethan looked at his collection of ornaments. He thought about what they represented: hours of careful work, the transformation of discarded materials into something beautiful, the human impulse to create meaning and joy, even in difficult circumstances. Wasn't that worth something? Didn't that embody exactly the kind of honest, unheralded labor the ceremony was supposed to honor? He stood and walked to his workbench, surveying his creations. Most were too simple, too obviously made from salvage, but there, hanging from a wire, was the piece he had just completed: the miniature cathedral window. Fragments of colored, transparent materials fitted together in an intricate geometric pattern. When light passed through it, it cast rainbow patterns on whatever surface lay behind. It was delicate, complex, and unlike anything else he had made. Ethan picked it up carefully. It was designed to hang with a loop of silver wire at the top. The fragments he had used came from a dozen different sources: blue from a broken medical scanner, red from a damaged viewport filter, green from shattered Valorine crystal, gold from a discarded power coupling. Each piece cut and shaped by hand, fitted together with patience and precision. It was beautiful. It was also made from garbage by a janitor with delusions of relevance. Ethan almost put it back. Then he thought about the princess's words: honest but unheralded labor, maintaining what others take for granted. That was exactly what this ornament was: taking what others had discarded and revealing the beauty it still contained. He wrapped the ornament carefully in a piece of clean cloth and tucked it into his pocket. It was probably a terrible idea. It would probably result in him being laughed at by the entire diplomatic corps, but it felt right, and that was worth the risk. At 1,800 hours, Ethan reported to the Diplomatic Services office. A hairy Valorant aide looked him up and down with obvious dismay, then handed him a formal suit that actually fit reasonably well. The aide explained the basic protocol: walk to the designated spot when called. Bo when the princess approached, accept the gift with both hands, thank her formally. Bo again. Exit to the left. Simple enough. In theory, by 1900 hours, Ethan stood in a small chamber adjacent to the grand hall, listening to the sounds of the gathering crowd beyond. Through a crack in the door, he could see hundreds of beings in formal attire representing dozens of species and governments. Lights, cameras, recording devices. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a media event. His hand went to his pocket, feeling the shape of the wrapped ornament. Was he really going to do this? Was he really going to offer a homemade Christmas decoration to Dragon royalty in front of the entire station? A chime sounded. The aide gestured sharply. It was time. Ethan walked through the doors into the grand hall and the sheer scale of it threatened to overwhelm him. The ceiling soared 20 m. Overhead, decorated with real plants. From a dozen worlds, the crowd filled. Tired seating on both sides, creating a central aisle that led to a raised platform. On that platform stood Princess Seraphine, somehow even more impressive than she had been in the conference room. Her scales seemed to glow in the carefully arranged lighting. Her presence dominated the space. Ethan walked down the aisle, very conscious of the hundreds of eyes watching him. He recognized some faces in the crowd. There was Vex, Quellen, and Morak, looking confused about why the trash craft human was at a formal diplomatic function. There were his supervisors, equally baffled. There were dignitaries and merchants and power brokers, all wondering who this nobody was and why he mattered. He reached the platform and climbed the 3 steps. Princess Seraphine stood before him, towering over his human height. Up close he could see that her scales had patterns. Within patterns, fractals of color that shifted as she moved. Her eyes locked onto his, and Ethan had the unsettling feeling that she could see straight through him to every inadequate thought he had ever had. Her voice carried across the hall without effort. She said, "Ethan Cole of Earth, you have been selected to receive recognition on behalf of all those who labor in service to this station. Your work, though unseen by many, maintains the foundation upon which greater achievements are built. On behalf of the Draconian Empire and my family, I present you with this gift." An aide approached, carrying a small but exquisite box. The princess took it and extended it toward Ethan. With both hands, he accepted it the same way, bowing as he had been instructed. The box was lighter than he expected. When he opened it, he found a crystal pendant on a chain. The crystal was Draconian fire gem, incredibly rare and valuable. It pulsed with an inner light that matched his heartbeat, a property unique to the species. This single gem was probably worth more than he would earn in 5 years. Ethan's voice came out steadier than he felt. He said, "Your Highness, I am deeply honored by this gift and by the recognition it represents. Thank you for acknowledging the work of people like me. It means more than you might know." This was the moment he was supposed to bow again and leave. The ceremony would conclude. Everything would proceed as planned. Instead, Ethan reached into his pocket. He said, "Your Highness, in human culture, it is customary when receiving a gift to offer one in return. However humble, I know that nothing I possess can match the value of what you have given me, but I would like to offer you something I made myself as a symbol of gratitude and of the human tradition that values the work of one's own hands." He unwrapped the cloth and held out the miniature cathedral window ornament. In the lights of the grand hall, it came alive. The colored fragments glowed. Rainbow patterns danced across his hands and the platform. The geometric design seemed to shift and change as the angle of light changed, creating an effect of depth and movement. The silence in the hall was absolute. Ethan could feel the shock radiating from the crowd. What was the maintenance worker doing? Had he lost his mind? Princess Seraphine stared at the ornament, her expression unreadable. Her golden eyes moved from the object to Ethan's face and back again. She said slowly, "You made this with your own hands?" Ethan nodded, his mouth dry. He said, "Yes, Your Highness. It's a Christmas ornament, a human tradition. For our winter celebration, we make Decorations to honor the season, 2. Bring beauty into our homes. This particular design is meant to catch light and transform it to take something simple and reveal the complexity within it. The materials are salvaged from broken equipment, things others had discarded as worthless. The princess reached out and took the ornament from his hands. Her claws, which could easily shred steel, handled it with surprising delicacy. She held it up, turning it slowly, watching the light play through the colored fragments. She said, "You transformed refuse into this." Ethan said, "I transformed materials that still had potential into something that celebrates that potential. Nothing is truly worthless. Sometimes we just have to look at it differently." The princess was quiet for a long moment. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of hundreds of beings watching this interaction, could sense that he had either done something incredibly right or incredibly wrong. Then, Princess Seraphine did something that no one in the grand hall expected. She smiled, not the cold, formal expression of diplomatic courtesy, but a genuine smile that showed teeth and transformed her entire face. She said, "In 10,000 years of draconian history, I do not believe anyone has ever given a member of my family a gift made from garbage." The hall erupted in laughter. Ethan felt his face burning, felt the humiliation washing over him. Of course. It was too stupid, too primitive, too human. But the princess raised one clawed hand and the laughter died. Instantly she continued, "And in those 10,000 years, I do not believe anyone has given us a gift that so perfectly captures a truth we have forgotten. We Draconians pride ourselves on our treasures, our accumulated wealth, our ancient artifacts. We measure worth in precious metals and rare gems. But this human, this maintenance worker has reminded me that true artistry is not in the materials used, but in the vision that transforms them. He has taken what we discarded and shown us the beauty we failed to see." She held the ornament higher, letting the light stream through it, casting rainbow patterns across her face and scales. She said, "This is not garbage. This is philosophy made manifest. This is the fundamental human characteristic that makes your species so frustrating and so valuable in equal measure. You refuse to accept that anything is without worth. You look at ruins and see potential. You take disasters and find opportunities. You are handed nothing and create something. This ornament represents more honest craftsmanship and creative spirit than half the expensive gifts I have received this month." The princess turned to face the crowd, still holding Ethan's ornament. She declared, "Let it be known that Princess Seraphine of the House of Flames Eternal has accepted a Christmas ornament from Ethan Cole of Earth, and she declares it a treasure not for its material value, but for what it represents, the indomitable human spirit that transforms the broken world around them into something beautiful." She turned back to Ethan and her voice was quieter, meant just for him. She said, "I will wear this human. I will wear it openly when I return to the imperial court, and when my peers ask me about it, I will tell them about the janitor who taught a princess the difference between price and value." Before Ethan could respond, she did something that shocked him even more than her acceptance. She carefully attached the ornament to a chain around her neck, right next to her royal insignia and family emblems. The humble salvaged creation hung alongside artifacts worth fortunes, and somehow it didn't look out of place. The rainbow-lighted castmate, her scales shimmer in new ways. Princess said, I have one question for you, Ethan Cole, this Christmas. Tradition of yours, this creating of ornaments, is it only for humans? Ethan blinked, confused by the question. He said, well, no, Your Highness. Spirit of it is universal. It's about creating joy, beauty, and meaning. Anyone can participate if they want to. Princess Seraphine's smile widened. She said, excellent, then I declare that I am participating in human Christmas. I am wearing a Christmas ornament. Therefore, the Draconian Empire is now officially observing a human cultural tradition. My diplomatic team will be absolutely horrified, which is an added benefit. She turned to Administrator Kelvin in the crowd. The princess announced, Administrator, I am extending my stay on Meridian Station by 1 week. During this time, I wish to learn more about this Christmas tradition from Mr. Cole. I trust you can arrange appropriate meeting spaces and schedules. Kelvin stood, trying to hide her shock. She said, of course, Your Highness. It would be our honor to accommodate you. Princess Seraphine looked back at Ethan, and there was something in her expression that seemed almost playful. She said, you have given me a gift far greater than you realize, janitor. You have given me perspective. The least I can do is learn the full context of this tradition. Besides, you said these ornaments are meant to decorate trees. I wish to see this. I wish to understand how humans transform ordinary plants into ceremonial objects. Report to the diplomatic wing tomorrow at 1000 hours. We have much to discuss. The ceremony concluded shortly after, but Ethan barely registered any of it. He walked back to his quarters in a daze, still carrying the priceless fire gem pendant, still trying to process what had just happened. He had expected to be laughed at. Instead, Dragon Royalty was wearing his trash craft as a treasure and wanted to learn about Christmas, the universe. Ethan decided was deeply weird. The next morning, Ethan woke early and spent 2 hours making himself as presentable as possible. He wore the formal suit from the ceremony since it was the only nice clothing he owned. He gathered his collection of ornaments, packing them carefully in a storage container. If the princess wanted to learn about Christmas, he would teach her properly. At precisely 1000 hours, he stood outside the diplomatic wing, a section of the station he had only cleaned in the middle of the night when dignitaries were asleep. A protocol officer, a Valoran with elaborate facial tattoos indicating high rank, looked at him with barely concealed disdain. The officer said, the princess is waiting in Conference Suite 3. You will address her as Your Highness at all times. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not approach her closer than 2 m. Unless invited, you will not touch any objects in the suite. Is this clear? Ethan nodded, feeling his confidence from the previous night evaporating. Conference Suite 3 was stunning. Real wood paneling, authentic earth oak. From the looks of it, furniture that was probably worth more than his home colony's entire infrastructure budget. Windows showing the stars beyond. And, standing by those windows, still wearing his ornament around her neck, was Princess Seraphine. She turned as he entered, and her expression was thoughtful. She said, Ethan Cole, you arrived promptly. Good punctuality suggests respect, and I find I am inclined to respect you after last night. The protocol officer remained by the door watchful. Ethan set down his container of ornaments and bowed slightly. He said, "Your Highness, thank you for your interest in human traditions. I brought examples of different ornaments I've made. If you would like to see them." The princess gestured toward a table. She said, "Show me." Ethan unpacked his collection carefully. Stars and spheres and snowflakes and bells, each one different, each one carrying its own story of how he found the materials and what inspired the design. He explained as he set them out, falling into the rhythm of talking about something he genuinely loved. He said, "This one is made from power coupling fragments. When active couplings fail, they often crack. In these beautiful geometric patterns, I collected pieces over 6 months until I had enough to create this mosaic pattern, and this snowflake is wire from communication cables shaped and soldered. The cables were being replaced anyway, so I asked if I could keep the old ones. It took 47 individual wire pieces to create this design." Princess Seraphine picked up each ornament as he described it, examining it with the same careful attention she had shown his gift. Her claws traced the patterns, her golden eyes studied the construction. She said, "You do this alone. There are no other humans on the station to share this tradition with." Ethan shook his head. He said, "No, Your Highness, I'm the only human in this sector. Currently, the tradition calls for family and community, but I make do with what I have." The princess set down a delicate bell that chimed softly. She said, "That is profoundly lonely." Her bluntness caught Ethan off guard. He had been maintaining the polite fiction that he was fine, that his solitary celebration was sufficient. Having her state the truth so plainly made something in his chest tighten. He said quietly, "Yes, Your Highness, it is." She was silent for a moment, still looking at the ornaments spread across the table. She said, "I understand loneliness, janitor, perhaps not in the way you experience it, but I understand it nonetheless. I am the 7th child of the imperial house. My older siblings manage territories, command fleets, shape policy. I negotiate trade agreements on distant stations because it removes me from court politics, where I am simultaneously too valuable to ignore and too low in succession to truly matter. I am surrounded by advisors and attendants and protocol officers, and I am profoundly alone." Ethan looked at her, seeing past the scales and power to something fundamentally similar. Two beings far from home, going through the motions of their assigned roles, finding connection in an unexpected place. He said, "These ornaments, they're meant to be shared. The whole point of Christmas is bringing people together, creating warmth in the cold and dark. If you truly want to understand the tradition, we should make ornaments together. It's not the same as having family here, but it's something." The protocol officer by the door made a strangled sound of horror, apparently suggesting that dragon royalty engage manual crafts was several steps beyond acceptable. But Princess Seraphine's eyes brightened with interest. She said, "You would teach me, Your Highness, the princess of the Draconian Empire, to create decorations from salvage materials." Ethan smiled despite his nervousness. He said, "Your Highness, yesterday you told the entire station that my ornaments represented philosophy made manifest. If that's true, then learning to make them isn't just craft. It's engaging with a way of seeing the world, and yes, I would be honored to teach you. Princess Seraphine looked at the protocol officer. She said, leave us, return in 3 hours. I'm about to receive a very unconventional education, and I prefer not to have witnesses to my inevitable failures. The protocol officer looked like he wanted to object, but one did not argue with dragon royalty. He bowed and left, though his expression suggested he was already composing the report about this bizarre situation. Once they were alone, the princess's formal demeanor shifted slightly. She was still regal, still radiating power, but some of the diplomatic mask dropped away. She said, very well, teacher, where do we begin? Ethan pulled out his portable tool kit and some spare materials he had brought. He cleared space on the conference table, very aware that he was about to teach wirework and soldering to someone who wore more wealth than most planets possessed. He said, we'll start simple. A wire star. It teaches the basics of shaping, symmetry, and structural integrity, plus you get a finished product quickly, which helps maintain motivation. He demonstrated his hands moving through the familiar motions, cutting wire to length, creating the first point, bending and shaping. Princess watched intently, her golden eyes tracking every movement. When he handed her the wire and basic tools, her first attempt was terrible. Her claws, designed for combat and intimidation, had trouble with the delicate work. The wire kinked awkwardly. The symmetry was off. One point was twice as long as the others. Ethan expected frustration. Instead, Princess Seraphine laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. She said, I command trade fleets worth billions. I negotiate treaties that shape sector economies, and I cannot make a simple star from wire. This is delightfully humbling. Ethan grinned. He said, it takes practice. Here, let me show you a trick for controlling the wire with claws. You use the sides rather than the tips, like this. He guided her hands, showing her the technique. There was something surreal about providing instruction to someone so far above his social station, but the craft itself was a great equalizer. Skill mattered here, not rank. They worked for hours. Princess's second star was better than her first. Her third was actually decent. By the time she completed her fifth, it was genuinely good. The points, even in the structure sound, she held it up to the light, and Ethan could see pride in her expression. She said, I made this with my own hands, from raw materials to finished product. I have owned countless treasures, but this is the first thing I have personally created in decades. Ethan said, that's the real magic of Christmas crafts. It's not about the object itself, it's about the act of creation, the meditation of focused work, the satisfaction of completion. You're not just making ornaments, you're making memories and meaning. Princess Seraphine set down her completed star carefully, as if it were as valuable as any of the jewels she wore. She said, tell me about Christmas itself, the full tradition. I want to understand the context that produces these objects. So Ethan talked. He described Earth winters, though he had only experienced them in recordings and stories, his colony having been in a temperate zone. He explained the history, the mixture of religious significance and secular celebration, the evolution of traditions across centuries and cultures. He talked about Christmas trees, gifts, family gatherings, special foods, music, lights. In the darkness, the princess listened with the same intensity she had brought To learning the wirework, she asked questions that showed she was thinking deeply about what he described. She said it is a celebration of light and darkness, of generosity and scarcity, of family and isolation. These are not primitive values, these are the fundamental needs of all intelligent species dressed in cultural specifics. Ethan nodded. He said, exactly, that's why I think the tradition can translate. The specifics might be human, but the underlying needs are universal. They spent 3 more days like this. Each morning, Ethan would report to the diplomatic wing, and he and the princess would work on ornaments while discussing philosophy, culture, and life. She taught him about draconian history and customs. He taught her about human resilience and creativity. They argued about politics, laughed about cultural misunderstandings, and gradually became something approaching friends. As much as friendship was possible across such different circumstances, the princess's collection of handmade ornaments grew. She wore a different one each day, and each appearance in public, wearing obvious salvage craft, sent ripples through the station's social dynamics. If dragon royalty valued these human creations, perhaps they were worth respecting. Ethan noticed the change. How others treated him. The mocking had stopped. People nodded to him in corridors. His opinions and maintenance meetings were suddenly taken seriously. On the 5th day, Princess Seraphine arrived at their session with an unusual expression, something between excitement and mischief. She said, I have been thinking about your Christmas tradition. You said it involves a tree decorated with these ornaments. The station has no suitable trees. However, the diplomatic wing has a rather large and currently in used atrium with several well-established Valoran sparkle trees, which are approximately 3 m tall and have branch structures suitable for hanging objects. I have taken the liberty of claiming this atrium for the next week. We are going to create a proper Christmas display. Ethan stared at her. He said, Your Highness, that's incredibly generous, but those sparkle trees are expensive and considered semi-sacred too. Valorans, we can't just hang ornaments on them. Princess Seraphine's smile was decidedly dragon-like. She said, I have negotiated with the Valoran ambassador in exchange for certain trade concessions my empire is pleased to provide. They are allowing temporary decorative use of 3 sparkle trees. Additionally, I have invited every diplomatic representative currently on the station to attend a cultural exhibition in 6 days. We are going to show them all what human Christmas looks like, created by human and draconian hands working together. Ethan felt excitement and terror in equal measure. This was far beyond his simple plan to make a few ornaments for his quarters. He said, that's a huge undertaking. We'll need dozens more ornaments. We'll need lights, arrangements, coordination. The princess nodded. She said, which is why I have done something else. I have issued an open invitation to anyone on the station who wishes to participate in learning this human tradition. I have provided materials and workspace, and I have offered a rather substantial prize for the most creative ornament designed to be judged by you and me together. Ethan's mind reeled. He said, You're turning Christmas into a station-wide event. She said, I am turning it into a diplomatic statement. Humans value creativity, cooperation, and finding beauty in unexpected places. These are traits that serve the broader galactic community well. If we are to work Together across species lines, we must learn to appreciate each other's cultural expressions. What better way than a participatory celebration over the next 6 days? Meridian Station transformed. The atrium became a hive of activity. Beings from a dozen species showed up to learn ornament making. Some came out of genuine interest, others came because a draconian princess had expressed interest and they wanted to curry favor. A few came because they were bored and it seemed like an interesting diversion. Ethan found himself teaching wirework to Aryan, merchant who had fingers like sausages. But surprising patience, he showed a group of young Zethri students how to create snowflakes from reflective materials. He helped a Grinchar engineer, not Mordek thankfully, construct a complex geometric mobile that incorporated tiny lights. Princess Seraphine was everywhere, working alongside station residents with her sleeves rolled up metaphorically, speaking, and her scales sometimes smudged with solder. She praised good work, offered constructive criticism, and laughed when things went wrong. Ethan watched her interact with a Pelion child struggling with a bent wire star, saw her kneel down to the child's level and patiently explain the technique, and realized she was genuinely enjoying this. The collection of ornaments grew to hundreds. They ranged from simple to incredibly complex. Some were beautiful, some were charmingly awkward. All of them represented effort and participation. On the morning of the 6th day, Ethan and the princess stood in the atrium, overseeing final preparations. The 3 Valoran sparkle trees had been positioned in a triangular arrangement. Their natural bioluminescence provided a soft blue-green glow that complemented the ornaments beautifully. Workers, many of whom had created ornaments themselves, were carefully hanging the decorations. Each tree took on its own character as the ornaments accumulated. One became covered in primarily wire stars and snowflakes, creating an elegant, delicate aesthetic. Another featured more colorful, complex pieces that caught and reflected light dramatically. The third was a mix, showcasing the full range of creativity the station had produced. Ethan had created special pieces for the tops of the trees, elaborate star constructions that incorporated small power cells so they glowed from within. As workers carefully positioned them, the entire display came together. Princess Seraphine stood beside Ethan, and for a long moment, they just looked at what they had created together. She said quietly, "This is remarkable, not because it is expensive or rare, but because it represents cooperation, creativity, and shared joy. These are the foundations of civilization, and we so often forget them in favor of profit margins and power dynamics." Ethan said, "You get all of this legitimacy if you hadn't worn that first ornament, if you hadn't declared it valuable, none of this would have happened. People followed your lead." She turned to look at him, her golden eyes thoughtful. She said, "They followed the idea you represented. I merely recognized it and gave it a platform. The credit is yours, janitor. You maintained your traditions and your values even when mocked. You refused to let the universe convince you that beauty and meaning were foolish pursuits. That integrity was what impressed me, not the object itself." Before Ethan could respond, Administrator Kelvin approached with several other station officials. Kelvin said, "The diplomatic representatives are gathering. We should take our positions." This is going to be memorable. One way or another, the cultural exhibition began at 1,800 hours. The atrium had been set up with seating for 200, though nearly 300 beings crowded in. Standing room only, representatives from every major power in the sector were present. The room hummed with conversation in a dozen languages, filtered through translation implants into a general murmur. Princess Seraphine stood at a podium with Ethan beside her, feeling absurdly out of place in his borrowed formal attire. The princess wore her most elaborate robes, her scales polished to a mirror sheen, and around her neck, clearly visible, hung 5 of the ornaments she had made herself, including the cathedral window Ethan had given her. The princess's voice cut through the murmur, commanding instant attention. She said, "Honored representatives, I have invited you here to witness and participate in a human cultural tradition called Christmas. Over the past week, I have learned that this tradition embodies values critical to successful interspecies cooperation. It celebrates creativity, generosity, family, and the creation of beauty and meaning even in difficult circumstances. The ornaments you see before you were made by beings from 16 different species working together, learning from each other, creating something greater than any individual could produce alone." She gestured to the decorated trees, which looked spectacular in the carefully arranged lighting. She continued, "I have been accused, sometimes fairly, of being overly focused on material value in my trade negotiation, of measuring success purely in economic terms. This human janitor Ethan Cole reminded me that value exists beyond price. These ornaments are worth nothing on any market. They are also priceless because they represent the best of what we can be when we choose cooperation over competition, creativity over consumption, meaning over mere material accumulation." She paused, letting her words settle. She said, "I am returning to the Draconian Empire tomorrow. I am bringing with me not just trade agreements but these ornaments and this experience. I am going to introduce Christmas to the imperial court. I am going to suggest strongly that we as a species have much to learn from humans about maintaining cultural identity and finding joy in simplicity, and I am going to wear these ornaments proudly as a reminder that true nobility lies not in what we possess but in what we create and share." The crowd was silent, processing this declaration from one of the most powerful beings in the sector. Then someone started clapping. It was Administrator Kelvin, her applause sharp and clear. Others joined the sound, building until the atrium filled with it. Not everyone was clapping. Ethan could see some diplomats who looked confused or dismissive, but enough were showing approval that the message was clear. This mattered. After the formal presentations, the exhibition became more social. Diplomats wandered among the trees, examining ornaments, asking questions. Ethan found himself surrounded by beings wanting to know more about Christmas, about Earth, traditions, about human culture. Therian Trade Minister said, "This concept of gift giving without expectation of equal return, it seems economically inefficient, but I find it intriguing. The social bonds it creates might have value that exceeds the material cost." A Valoran scientist said, "The transformation of discarded materials into aesthetic objects demonstrates a creative approach to resource utilization we might apply to waste management challenges." A young Creolian diplomat not thankfully said. I created 3 ornaments during the workshops. I have never made anything decorative before. My culture prizes function over form, but I found the process meditative, almost spiritual. I understand better now why humans maintain these traditions. Ethan answered questions, told stories, and watched the impossible become real. Human tradition, his lonely attempt to create holiday cheer, had become a diplomatic event that was shifting how species viewed each other. Late in the evening, as the crowd thinned, Ethan found himself alone with Princess Seraphine by the trees. The ornaments caught the light, creating patterns of shadow and color across the floor. The princess said, I have a gift for you. Janitor, a final exchange to balance out accounts. She handed him a data tablet. On it was a contract, official and bearing the seals of multiple governments. She said, I have established a cultural exchange program between the Draconian Empire and human settlements. The program will fund human artists, craftspeople, and cultural specialists to travel to Draconian worlds and teach our people about Earth traditions. In return, Draconian artists will visit human colonies to share our own cultural heritage. You, Ethan Cole, have been appointed as the program's first director. The position comes with appropriate salary, housing, and travel allowances. You will no longer be janitor unless you choose to be. Ethan stared at the tablet, not quite believing what he was reading. He said, Your Highness, this is too much. I can't possibly. She interrupted. You can and you will. You have demonstrated the exact qualities needed to bridge cultural divides. You respect traditions while remaining open to new ideas. You find value where others see waste. You maintain your integrity regardless of circumstance. These are not common traits, and they are desperately needed if our species are to truly cooperate rather than merely coexist. Ethan felt tears threatening, which would be embarrassing, but he didn't care. He said, Thank you, this means everything. You've changed my life, Princess. Seraphine's expression softened. She said, You changed mine first, Janitor. You reminded me why I chose diplomacy over war, why I believe cooperation is possible, that is worth far more than any trade agreement. She reached up and touched the cathedral window ornament around her neck. She continued, I meant what I said. I am bringing Christmas to the imperial court. I am going to teach my people to see value the way you do. And I am going to commission you to create a special ornament for each member of my immediate family so they can begin their own collections. You will be well compensated naturally. Ethan laughed, the sound coming out wet, because he was definitely crying now. He said, I'll make them with honor, Your Highness, and I won't charge you a credit. They'll be gifts, proper Christmas gifts, because that's how the tradition works. She smiled, showing teeth that could rent steel. She said, Then I will owe you a debt of honor, which is more binding than any contract. I accept. The next morning, Princess Seraphine departed Meridian Station with an entourage of ships, staff, and cargo. Included in that cargo were 73 handmade ornaments packed with extreme care. She wore the cathedral window ornament Ethan had given her, visible to all the media. Covering her departure, Ethan watched from the public observation deck as her ship pulled away from the docking port. He wore the fire gem pendant she had given him, and in his quarters was a formal letter of appointment to a position that would take him across the Galaxy, teaching and learning, building. Bridges between cultures, he thought. About the journey from lonely janitor, making trash crafts, to cultural ambassador. It seemed impossible, the kind of story people would dismiss as fiction if you told them, but it had happened, all because he had refused to let go of something that mattered to him, all because he had offered a gift without expectation of return, all because he had seen value where others saw waste. Around him on the observation deck were others who had participated in the ornament-making workshops. He recognized the merchant, the Zai students, the Grinchar engineer. They nodded to him with respect. The Grinchar said, "I heard about your appointment. Well deserved, you taught us something valuable." Human. Ethan smiled. He said, "You taught me something too, that traditions can grow and change, that they can be shared across the strangest divides, and that sometimes the universe surprises you with beauty when you least expect it." His commune chirped. Message from Administrator Kelvin. Report to my office at 1400 hours. We need to discuss logistics for your new position and the cultural center we are establishing on Meridian to support ongoing programs. A message from Princess Seraphine. I have arrived home. The court is baffled by my ornaments. This is delightful. Begin designing the family collection. I want something that captures the essence of each person. Detailed descriptions will follow. Message from a human colony administrator he had never heard of. We learned about the Christmas exhibition on Meridian. Our colony would like to host a similar event. Would you be willing to consult? Ethan stood at the window, watching ships come and go, watching the station rotate slowly against the stars. He thought about Christmas, about the meaning behind the traditions, about the human drive to create light and darkness and meaning in chaos. He had started this journey trying to bring a little holiday cheer to his empty quarters. He was ending it as someone who had shown the galaxy that human traditions had value, that creativity and generosity could bridge divides, that beauty mattered for its own sake. The ornaments were still on display in the atrium. Administrator Kelvin had decided to make it permanent, an ongoing tribute to interspecies cooperation. Ethan made a mental note to create new pieces regularly to keep the display fresh and growing, a living symbol of what was possible when people chose to create together. He turned from the window and headed back toward his quarters, which would be his quarters for only another week before he moved to better accommodations. He had work to do, ornaments to design for Draconian royalty, curricula to develop for cultural exchange programs, workshops to plan. But first he was going to make one more ornament, a special one just for himself. He would make it from a fragment of the observation deck window he had stood at so many times, looking out at the stars and feeling alone. He would transform that loneliness into something beautiful, something that captured this moment when everything changed, because that was what humans did. They took the broken pieces of their lives, the discarded fragments of experience, and they made something meaningful. They made art and tradition and connection. They made Christmas ornaments from garbage and turned them into treasures. And now, thanks to a janitor who refused to give up and a princess who chose to see value where others saw waste, the entire galaxy was learning that lesson. Ethan walked through the corridors of Meridian Station and people nodded to him. smiled at him, respected him, he thought. About Vex, Quellen, and Mordek, who had mocked his trash crafts. He had seen them at the exhibition, looking confused and somewhat ashamed. Mordek had even approached him afterward, offering a gruff apology for his earlier dismissal. The universe was strange and surprising, and sometimes cruel, but it was also capable of sudden beauty, of unexpected kindness, of transformations that seemed impossible until they happened. Ethan reached his quarters and sat down at his workbench, which he would soon pack up and move to a real workshop space. He looked at his tools, his materials, his collection of salvaged fragments waiting to be transformed, and he smiled because he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever new worlds and cultures he encountered, he would face them the same way he had faced loneliness on Meridian Station, with creativity, with generosity, with the determination to find and create beauty wherever he went. He picked up a fragment of transparent aluminum from the observation deck, a piece that had been replaced during routine maintenance. It still carried the faint scratches and marks of years of use, the accumulated evidence of countless beings looking out at the stars. Perfect. Ethan began to work, his hands moving through familiar motions, creating something new from something old, transforming waste into wonder. Outside his window, the stars shone, steady and bright, and somewhere among them a dragon princess wore a Christmas ornament made by a janitor's hands, and the galaxy was just a little bit more connected, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more human than it had been before. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next